Cambri. We got Caleb on the line. What do you want to ask him?
What are your things that you look for whenever you go on your property tours?
Oh, I love that question. If the neighborhood's a big one, how many
Mhm.
cars are on blocks, window units,
Mhm.
and insects? A couple of things that we even look at before touring a property and we look at during the underwriting process is Federal Pacific Panels, Stab Lock, Zinsco, because insurance will charge more for those because they have aluminum wiring, which is a fire hazard.
Mhm.
And so looking at that, and you have to assume that you're going to renovate those
Mhm.
while you can, and also pay more in insurance.
Yeah.
There's certain plumbing that you want to look out for, or at least know about whenever you're underwriting, and think worst case scenario, you're going to have to renovate that.
Hey, I'm Brian Briscoe, host of the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. And this podcast is different from everything else out there. I bring together new and aspiring investors on each and every episode and let the aspiring investors ask the questions that they need answered. And if you're an aspiring investor yourself, you probably have the same questions. So before you get to this episode that we have prepared for you, make sure you hit the subscribe button and that little notification bell to make sure you get notified every time we post a new episode. And now, enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. I'm your host, Brian Briscoe. Got another great show for you guys coming up. It's another one of our Ask the Expert episodes with two amazing people on the line with us again right now. We've got Caleb Johnson as our experienced investor and Cambri McCoy as our aspiring investor. So guys, welcome to the show today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. And like I said, thanks for being here. The show wouldn't be a show without really awesome guests. So, well, as is tradition, Caleb, you're going to be up first. So do us a favor. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, I have been investing since I was 19 years old. I became an entrepreneur when I was 18. And during high school, I was really your average student. I mean, C, B's, maybe on a good subject that I liked, and never really liked school. So when I was shown entrepreneurship, I really caught that bug, loved that I could put in something and then get an equal output, and just love being my own boss. And so both my parents are W-2 workers, and my dad's worked for the government for 30 years. And that's kind of my backstory.
Yeah. So what about the entrepreneur life really excites you?
Well, being able to be my own boss, I don't like the feeling of being forced to go to work or have my boss tell me something that I don't feel like is the best path or even the right thing and ethical thing to do for the client. And it just really gives me freedom. And you know this, Brian, if you own a business, let's say real estate, and you want to shift markets because you see something coming up, then you can do so. Right. If you have a job and you see something that the boss doesn't agree with, then your thoughts can be pushed to the side. So that's really what turned me on to entrepreneurship.
Awesome. Now, next question, there's lots of different directions you can go in entrepreneurship. What took you to multifamily?
Yeah, I love that question. And that happened about 1 or 2 years after I graduated high school. And my mom was 60 years old at the time, and she had both of her knees replaced. And so she took 3 months off of work to kind of recover from that surgery. And during that time, she was going to live off of her savings. And at the end of 3 months, she had not fully recovered, but she could not continue to take that sabbatical because she couldn't afford to live off of her savings anymore. And being around that age, she was saving for retirement too. So the pressure was on her to really start bringing some income in. And I would see her come home in tears because she was an occupational therapist and be on her feet, for 6 hours a day. And so the pain was just so much for her, and she would come home crying. And that broke my heart. And I really wanted to help her financially so she could retire on time or early. And I also saw that I did not want that for myself in the future. I did not want to be forced to go to a job when something unforeseen happened and I had to go to work. And I also didn't want to relay that message to my future children, son, daughter, and say, hey, this is what you need to do. You know, things happen and you don't expect it, but there's nothing you can do. And I did not like that idea. And also around the same time, I learned that 90% of millionaires had gotten their millions through real estate investing.
Yeah.
And when I learned that, I thought that was crazy. You know, 90% of the wealthy had gotten their wealth through this one thing. And when I learned that, I thought those were really good odds. So I knew I had to start doing more research, and I just started with free resources, and it really just grew from there.
Okay, cool. I appreciate that. And thanks for sharing that personal story, about your mother. I think that's something that a lot of people, you see the example of your parents for, good or bad, and it really drives you to do a lot of stuff. So thanks for sharing that. Now, as far as getting into real estate, we talked about why. What was your experience? How did you get in, and what did that path look like, once you decided to get into real estate?
Yeah, well, the way I started was free resources, and I started with YouTube, looking at, I think it was HGTV, Flip or Flop, things like that. And I found Bigger Pockets as well. And that was such an amazing resource. It was a free resource. It still is a free resource. And just from a networking perspective, and if the audience hasn't heard about Bigger Pockets, it's like Facebook for real estate investors. And they have an amazing podcast as well. I feel like they have 50 different podcasts now, but
seems like they do. Right.
But back then they just had the one. And so I listened to that and really learned about the house hacking strategy of where you buy let's say a duplex or a fourplex, you live in one unit and you rent out the other three, and you're able to leverage a very low down payment mortgage because you're living on the property, but your tenants are paying your mortgage down, the bills down, and they might even be paying you for owning the property. So it was a great way for me to get my feet wet. And I duplicated that so I did that with a fourplex first and then a duplex, and since sold those assets. And it was a great time to do that. 2020, 2021 is when we sold those. So, and being in Phoenix, I mean, praise God, it was such a good market to sell. And from there, I scaled into apartment investing, larger stuff. And because I saw the wealth creation in that, and that there was even more control, right? If I raise the rents a certain amount, the income generated is going to raise the NOI. So that's going to raise the price of the building. So the better it performs, the more money we can sell, or the more money we can make when we do sell. And scale of economy, you have, let's say 100 units under one roof compared to a single family home with one unit under one roof. Vacancy has helped. So, and we scaled into apartments, and that's what we're doing today.
Nice. Yeah, I think a lot of people kind of go through a very similar path, and I had aspirations to do what you did, which was like buy the fourplex, but I think by the time I got bit by the real estate bug, I had, 3 or 4 kids, and try finding a fourplex with one of the units large enough for 4 kids.
That's hard.
Yeah. My wife, for good reason, vetoed that every time I brought it up. It was like, no, we're not living in a fourplex.
Smart girl.
Okay. Yeah. But anyway, cool. I appreciate that. So as far as so you started with the fourplex and the duplex, and then how did you grow from there?
Yeah. So I sold the fourplex, did a 1031 exchange into a retail facility. And I went to a real estate meetup actually probably 3 years ago. And the guest speaker was Corey Peterson, labels himself the Big Kahuna. And at the time he owned about $150 million of real estate. And he actually lives in the same market as I do. So that was pretty cool. But at the time I wanted to focus on residential investing, but this meetup was focused around multifamily. And Corey shared his story about his first apartment transaction where, long story short, he bought it and then within 2 years sold it and made $2 million in 2 years. And it was just incredible for me to think about that, where, I mean, you can't go into residential and replicate that. You know, how many single family homes do you need to buy to be able to make $2 million and let alone be able to scale that into 2 years?
Yeah.
It just, I didn't see a way to make that happen. And at the same time, he was able to leverage his network. And he said that both industries, residential and commercial, are completely different,
Yeah.
two completely different worlds. And what I thought first is I was going to have 5 years of residential experience, and then I would just scale into apartments. But he really showed me that you're going to be green regardless of when you start in apartments if you have a residential background. So you just need to get started.
Mhm.
You know, you're going to go through that learning period, and that's okay. So that's actually right when I started investing in apartments and doing more research on that and wanting to raise capital and underwriting and broker relations. And so there's a lot there that we could unpack, I'm sure, but that's kind of how we scaled to where we are today.
Nice. Love it. Love it. Well, let's talk about one of the properties that you've done. Go into some detail, however much detail you want to share, and tell us about one of the properties.
I'll share this property. It's actually, we were talking offline earlier about how Cambry's in Oklahoma. And so I'll share this property because it's located in Oklahoma.
Mhm.
So we bought a 16-unit apartment, and it was actually my first apartment deal. And it's right in Oklahoma City, about, I mean, a 5-minute walk from OU. So the big city, or the big university that's in the main MSA there. And yeah, it was an off-market opportunity. Just had a broker relationship, and we can dive more into that. But we've owned that for about 1.5 years now, and it's a great performing asset.
Yeah. Let's dive a little more into that. So you said broker relationship. Just go over how you guys got that and how it's gone.
So the way I started investing in and building those broker relationships was, once I found a market that I wanted to invest in, I went on Crexy and LoopNet, which is really just an MLS for apartments or commercial real estate. And so it's a free resource. I went on there and I looked at all the apartment buildings in that market, and I wrote down all the brokers' contact information, email, phone number if they had it. And I would call all of them. And if I liked the deal, then I would ask for more information, a rent roll and a T12, so the financial information. And then if I didn't like the deal that they had on there, then I would ask them if they knew of any sellers that wanted to sell. And I knew what my metrics were, let's say 20-unit apartment buildings or 50-unit apartment buildings, whatever that is. And I actually called this broker, and she had a property that was 2 years old that was on the market, and she had already sold it, but she said that she knew a seller that might be considering to sell. He wanted to sell 2 years ago, and it just didn't happen. And so we might be considering it today.
Yeah.
And so I did have to follow up with her probably for a week, calling her every 2 days. When she finally did pick up, she said she had talked to him and he was interested in selling, and she sent me some more information, and it was not on market. It was just, she had a relationship with the seller, and it was in a great location, and it really cash flowed well, and we could get some great debt on it. A full property that really just had very low rents. Rents were about $535, and they were all 1 bedrooms, and market was $700. And it was just really poorly managed. And the owner, he lived in California, and this property being in Oklahoma, he was just out of touch with the property, and the property management company was just charging him out the wazoo. So we saw opportunity to raise the income, lower the expenses, and yeah, it's a great performing asset today.
Yeah, and for those listening, if you want to rewind, go back and listen to that again. All right. A lot of people that I talk to have a hard time, getting into the market. But he just gave some very actionable tips on, how to build relationships with brokers and how to leverage, Crexy and LoopNet to be able to find properties. So anyway, Caleb, thanks for that. I appreciate it very much. Some solid tips there. So let's move on. Something I'd like to ask everybody, and it's about their motivation and about their why. And So what is your big burning why?
For me, I actually shared my why earlier.
Yeah.
And so that being my mom, and really wanted to travel more now too. And so that's kind of grown over time, but that was really my why. How about you, Cambry?
My big why has been my family, similar to a lot of people. I want to be able to increase my family time. I want to be able to focus on hobbies, focus on giving back to others. And I want to travel. I want to go outside of the US of A. I have been a couple of times, but I want to go further without worrying about, am I going to get a paycheck, or do I need to use PTO, and how many days I have, and things of that nature. So I have a very similar why.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I'll tell you though, if you do well enough at real estate, you can have 365 days a year of PTO. If so wouldn't that be amazing, right?
Amazing. Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know if I could take a year off, is the answer. I think I might get too antsy if I wasn't doing something all that time. I'm sure I'd find something to do, but
yeah.
well, cool. Well, hey, Caleb, back to you. One last question, and that's what's next for you?
What's next for me is, we're at an interesting period where seller expectations, this being early 2023, they're still expecting 2021 pricing. And so we have seen a 50% decline in transaction volume from last year. So it's really an interesting period, and we're using this time to strengthen our systems and processes and look at diversifying into, let's say, short-term rentals or smaller markets or properties that are really just cash flowing. And so diversifying there. And at the same time, looking at emerging markets. David Lindahl wrote an amazing book called Emerging Real Estate Markets. And, we want to start, let's say, a direct mail campaign to these smaller markets that might be off the radar and emerging, and no one would think about investing there, but they have great job growth and they're really on the cups of expanding and growing and rents increasing. So we want to start building those relationships with sellers now and brokers as well, so that we have a good foothold for when 2024 or 2025 come around, and we can just pick up opportunities for pennies on the dollar.
Yeah. What markets catch your eye?
Well, we haven't done too much research. I mean, we've looked at Florida, Texas, of course, everyone's looking at those, Alabama, and we still like Oklahoma. Actually, interesting enough, we're looking at Hawaii for short-term rentals, and that is a great place to do a tax write-off when you visit your property. And it's, they have amazing cash flow. So that is really an interesting market that we're considering.
Yeah, I love the idea, buy a property where you want a vacation. I mean, I've taken them to my family to Orlando the last couple of years. And every time I do there, it's like, man, I wish I had something in Orlando. I wish I had something in Orlando, but eventually I will, is the answer. But I think if I ever jump into the short-term rental market, my first one's probably going to be Orlando, just so I can, make my annual vacation a tax write-off. But all right. Well, switch gears real quick. And Cambry, how's it going?
It is going great. And Caleb, I appreciate all of your little nuggets that you've been throwing out so far. But I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, he's had some good nuggets. I mean, we get a lot of nuggets on the show, but Caleb, you've had some really good ones. So
praise God.
I don't often say, hey, listener, stop, go back and listen to that one again. So, but Cambry, let's talk about you now. Tell us a little about yourself.
Well, I find it interesting, Caleb, that your mom is an OT. I am a physical therapist, and I definitely understand the hard work that goes into it. But I am a physical therapist. I have been since 2017. So in June, it'll be 6 years. I've recently been doing some travel therapy, and myself and my husband, we're now settling down in the Oklahoma area. I was born and raised in Texas, however, but we're settling down in the Oklahoma area. And we are excited to be a little bit more focused on our real estate journey. I've actually started working part-time, so I've cut my hours down to 20 in order to be able to focus a little bit more on the real estate side of things. So hoping that goes well for us.
Awesome. So what's been your biggest struggle getting in? And I mean, we'll have you ask your questions later, but what's been your biggest struggle so far?
I think time management has been my biggest struggle, which is why I moved down to 20 hours. I just felt like at the time you and I met, Brian, I was on the East Coast. So it was helpful because I had an hour when I get off of work, an hour or so for people that are in Central America, that I could still reach out to people. But time management and getting off at 4:30 and being tired from seeing 8 to 10 patients a day and constantly being, giving all of my energy to my patients and then coming home and having to put more energy into the real estate business, it was really difficult. And so I'm really kind of this is my first week where I'm kind of just finding my way and finding my schedule, and it seems to be helpful.
Nice. Yeah. Cutting down the hours is, it's nice for the real estate business, it gives you more time to focus on that. But well, since we already heard you why, we're just going to go straight into questions. So Cambri, we got Caleb on the line. What do you want to ask him?
So Caleb, I would like to ask, what was your most difficult challenge starting out at 18 and how did you overcome that?
Good one.
Yeah, that is a good question. And I think part of it is the imposter syndrome. Who's going to listen to me? I'm a younger investor. I'm just starting out. So that was something that I had to overcome. And still, I get that all day long, people that want to know how old I am or things like that. And it's interesting, but I think it's a great opportunity. But I think the way that you combat that is to show people that you're a hard worker, being able to and willing to outwork people and just put in the hours. And when you tell people, let's say if you want to partner with somebody, but you're the younger investor, you have no experience, how do you really show them that you're worth it? Well, you bring them a deal or you show them that you have value to bring. That can look very differently for different people, different occupations. But for me, I brought a deal to an operator, and that's actually how we closed about 4 deals in 12 months, just through sourcing off-market opportunities and bringing them to someone who could close. So telling people what you're going to do and then fulfilling on that commitment has really helped me.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, that's one thing that I definitely strive for. If I say I'm gonna, and that's in any aspect of life, if I say I'm gonna do something, all I have is my word. And I did talk to a broker earlier today to schedule a property tour, and it was my first time being vetted. He's like, well, is this your first deal, or how much experience, and do you have any partners? How are you gonna raise capital? And I was able to answer all of the questions.
Good.
Yeah.
It
didn't feel good at the time.
Well, if he calls you back, you answered the questions okay. And that's what I found out when I was starting, is I thought I answered all the questions great, and then the brokers aren't answering texts or emails. But hopefully he calls you back.
We shall see.
I think it's a great time too, because 2 years ago, it would be a lot more challenging to get a call back from a broker. But now it's interesting. They're calling me. and they're saying, hey, I've got this deal. Can you work on it? And so since the tides have changed, I think it's going to be a great opportunity for newer investors to really get into the market.
That's encouraging.
I've actually seen that a lot. And I mean, Cambri, we've obviously looked at a couple of deals together, but I've seen a big uptick in newer investors who have gotten properties under contract. And I think that's part of it is just, some of the brokers, the transaction volume isn't there, and so some of the bigger players are kind of putting things on hold. And so the brokers are like, maybe I'm going to call this new guy back now, and I think there are a lot of things that do make investing as a newer investor a little better, for, to say that in as proper English as I can think of.
My next question, Caleb, was have you used any creative financing techniques? And if so, what were they?
So we did pursue a property in Oklahoma where it was going to be partial seller financing, and that deal did not go through. But the way that it was going to be structured was they were going to provide $1 million of the equity, and we were going to give them a return. And I think the way we structured it was maybe the first 12 months, or actually it was going to be a 2-year term. So in 24 months, we would pay back their $1 million, and it would be interest only. And so that helped a lot with the cash flow, because we, at the time at least, thought that we could pay a lower percentage on that $1 million than having to raise it, right? If we had to go raise $1 million of equity extra, then we would need to pay, an 8% or a 10% cash on cash return, where they would be willing to accept 5.5%. Now, with that deal, it was very unique in the way that they were going to, similar to a 1031, they were going to leverage a 719 or something like that, but they were going to move their excess capital into a REIT. And so they were going to do that tax deferred, and the return that they were going to expect in that REIT was 15%. And so that's the cost of capital that they wanted. Again, we were initially offering 5.5, and they wanted 15. So we tried to make that happen, and it really just made the deal so tight. We had to renovate 75% of the interiors in 24 months. And this was a very over 150 plus unit property. So it really put a lot of pressure on us. And there were some other things factoring into that deal, but we ended up just saying, hey, we're just going to get a bigger loan amount, or we're going to raise this capital, because we're already going to give our investors 10% cash on cash return. So why are we going to pay you 15 or 17%?
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense. But it's so interesting. If you just ask, brokers or sellers, whoever you're talking to, is partial seller financing or seller financing available here? And the majority of the time you'll get no, but it'll surprise you when you hear a possibly or yes, or write it up at an offer, and I'll present it to them and we'll see what sticks. And that can help a lot.
We had one, and this was a really interesting deal. We had one seller that had a property, and we've actually come full cycle on this property, but he wanted to do a 1031 exchange on the back end. And if you know anything about 1031 exchanges, you've got 45 days to pick your new property. And what the seller didn't want was to be on a 45-day timeline. All right. He wanted to do a 1031 exchange, but he wanted to take his time looking for a property. And so he was a little bit wishy-washy on selling. But what we ended up doing is negotiating a master lease, where we would take over the operations, we would pay him. And what we negotiated is what his average income was over the previous 6 months. Okay. So we were going to pay him what his average income was over the previous 6 months. There was a lot of meat on the bone on this property. There were some renovations. There were things we thought we could do to immediately increase the revenue to the point to where it made sense for us. So we basically put a 2-year master lease together and gave him a 2-year runway to find his property. We negotiated the contract. We were ready to sign, and he found his property. And so he came to us and he just said, how about now? So we never actually signed it, but it ended up being exactly what he needed. And it kept us in the game on that property. It was one that we liked. And I think we ended up doing about 25 or 28% average annual return. So, the property performed well. But yeah, just to try to lock that one up, we offered that master lease scenario, and it ended up getting him to the negotiation table to talk about it. And then, like I said, he found a property and we bought it.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's really awesome. I did have one final question. Well, I think it's final. What are your biggies or things that you look for whenever you go on your property tours?
Oh, I love that question. If, the neighborhood's a big one, how many cars are on blocks, window units, and you can kind of just tell walking the property. Gosh, I've had some property tours where you walk through and 10% of the units, they're growing weed. And you're like, oh, well, that's a red flag right there. And insects, looking for those little things. And a couple of things that we even look at before touring a property and we look at during the underwriting process is Federal Pacific Panels, Stablock, Zinsco, because insurance will charge more for those because they have aluminum wiring, which is a fire hazard. And so looking at that, and you have to assume that you're going to renovate those while you can, and also pay more in insurance.
Yeah.
There's certain plumbing that you want to look out for, or at least know about whenever you're underwriting, and think worst case scenario, you're going to have to renovate that. And galvanized plumbing, and there's an orange plumbing, I can't remember of the name exactly, but it's pretty much, it was used in the 60s, and it's many layers of paper. And so over time, it actually condenses, and that can be a big problem, that can cause you, the current owner, the issue. And old roofs, flat roofs, that kind of happens in Oklahoma. So mansard roofs, that's another thing. And chillers, boilers, those are usually big ticket items when you're looking at larger properties. And I think those are kind of the big ticket things that if you don't account for them, they can really come back to bite you in the butt later down the road when you actually own the property.
Yeah.
But the person selling you the property, it's not their responsibility anymore.
Yeah. I think on an initial walkthrough, you're not going to have the access you do on due diligence. So depending on, what phase you're in, I'll have two completely different answers. But one thing that he mentioned that I personally like looking for is year, make, and model of the vehicles. All right. And that's going to give you an idea of the tenant base. If you're seeing a 1998 Toyota Corolla without a bumper, and that's the average car in the parking lot versus, a late model year, sedan, it's going to give you a really good idea of what the tenant base is like, So I think if there's one thing outside of the apartments that I look at, it's exactly that. And when I'm touring the neighborhood, it's the same thing. You can see exteriors, but when you start looking at, make and model year of cars, I think that tells you a lot about what type of neighborhood you're in and what type of tenants you're going to have at the property. Generally, when I'm doing like a property walkthrough, like pre-LOI or pre-contract, I'm looking for, general maintenance and upkeep. Have they kept this property maintained? Because if the exterior is not maintained, the interior is not going to be maintained either. You're usually going to see a better picture on the outside than you see on the inside. So I'm looking for indications that things aren't being maintained properly, so parking lots, potholes in parking lots, sidewalk cracks, things like that. Anything on the exterior that, signals they haven't maintained the property. So anyway.
And Brian, piggyback off of what you said with the vehicles, if a lot of the vehicles have trash, or you just look in the back seat and it looks filthy, that's what your apartment is going to look like as well. So just keep that in mind, that, it's amazing just how much the tenant's vehicle can show you, but that's another thing that we look for.
That's actually something I've never really thought of, and it makes perfect sense, but I've never, I'll go through the parking lot and look at the make and model years. I've never thought about just looking in the back window to see what the back seat looks like. That's actually a really good idea. So, wow, good one. Well, we're going to cap it with that, and we are out of time right now. So I got one last question for each of you. Caleb, you get to go first. How can listeners learn more about you?
Yeah, well, Brian, I really appreciate the opportunity for being here. And the way that the listeners can learn more about me is going to our podcast called From Trial to Triumph. And I interview people who have gone through tremendous trials and they've come out triumphant. And we do have a real estate, it is real estate focused, and sometimes it's not at the same time. So we'd love to have you guys check that out.
Cool. Awesome. And we'll put a link to that podcast in the show notes. And Cambri, same question for you. How can listeners learn more about you?
Yes. If anyone wants to find me, you may find me on LinkedIn at Cambri McCoy. I am there usually lurking, but also posting and networking at all times. Always networking. Never not networking.
Yep.
So, yes.
Sometimes lurking, but networking at the same time is what you're saying. But
Right.
All right, awesome. We'll put a link to her LinkedIn profile as well, so you can connect with her there. So, all right. Well, hey, once again, thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate your time. And it was great having a little chat with you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Hey, if you like that episode, make sure to subscribe. But more importantly, if you haven't joined our multifamily educational community yet, which we call the Tribe of Titans, you are missing out. Get 30 days free by clicking the link in the description to this episode, or go to thetribeoftitans.info, and we'll see you there.